Rereading some of the stuff I have written down to talk about here is reminding me why I don't love raptors. It's gross. I'm sorry. The frugivores only eat fruit. Cooper's hawk is a medium-sized raptor. Yes. Native to North America and found in forests throughout the US, plus southern Canada and northern Mexico. That's typically what you get with birds that live across North America. The US sort of takes up the middle bit, and then hot Canada and cold Mexico. They were once pretty elusive, but since the 70s, they have adapted to suburban and urban environments, and so it is not uncommon to see them as backyard breeders now, and as a frequent migrator at raptor watch sites. They have a rather significant sexual dimorphism in size, with females being about a third larger than males, which is great. Females are always the boring ones. I mean, they still sort of look the same, but at least they're bigger. They got something. Win for female birds everywhere, I guess. And this size difference is among the greatest that there is in the Accipitridae family. Did I say that right? Accipitridae. I don't remember. Which is the family that has hawks, eagles, and kites in it. It preys primarily on medium-sized birds and mammals, such as doves, robins, and rodents. As I mentioned, these guys were once rarely seen. In the mid-20th century, they had a decline in population due to a lot of hunting and pesticides, but they have since recovered and no longer are considered threatened or endangered, which is great. Even though they're eating other birds and that's gross to talk about, I still am glad that they're here. I promise. They get to join the party. And in case you were curious as to why they're called Cooper's hawk, they were actually named after a guy named William Cooper, who was an American naturalist in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And although he wasn't an author himself, a lot of the specimens he collected were used by other ornithologists at the time, including Charles Bonaparte, who named this hawk after him. So if you see one of these guys in the wild, odds are, like me, you'll go, that's a hawk, and have no idea what other specific thing they are. Cooper's red tail, red shoulder, it's a hawk. They look like a hawk. So this is what they look like. As I said, they are a medium-sized raptor, not huge. They have short, rounded wings and a long, rounded tail, aiding in agile pursuit of prey through dense foliage. Because that's what they do. Prey-driven. Bird of prey. One of those. Males are smaller than females. Sexual dimorphism for the win. I don't know. I love sexual dimorphism. I find it cooler when the sexes look different. Sue me. Their head is smoothly rounded with a beak blending into their forehead, unlike the sharper jutting bill of the sharp-shinned hawk, which they often get confused with. And their eye color changes with age, which is somewhat common in birds, starting out grayish, turning to a deep red as they turn into adults. And once they get to be adults, as I said, the males and the females look pretty much the same except for the size difference. And males are typically grayer, while females are browner. They are very strong delect? Why can't I speak? Why do I do this? I can't speak. They are very strong, direct flyers, and the shape that they make while they're flying clearly shows their head going past their wrists, unlike the sharp-shinned hawk, which again, they get confused with a lot. They're easy to confuse. Trying to tell the difference between them, okay? And they very often are seen with raised hackles, which gives them a very triangular head shape. Very different triangle than the eiders, though. Not gonna confuse those two. And yes, these hackles are the same hackles that your dog has, where their hair stands up a little bit when they're alarmed because there's a squirrel in your yard that's gonna attack. Except the hawk might actually get the squirrel. So as I said, these guys get confused with the sharp-shinned hawk a lot. They also get confused with the American ghost hawk, the broad-winged hawk, the red-shouldered hawk, and just hawks. They look like hawks. While looking at stuff about these hawks, it seems clear to me that for some reason people care more about the feather setup of hawk wings than songbird wings, or other birds that I've looked at, I guess, just generally. And maybe it's raptors broadly that people care about, but there was a lot about their primaries, so let me talk about it for a minute. Cooper's hawks have 10 primaries and 13 secondaries, including 3 teratiles and 12 rectrices. Hope I'm saying that right. There's always a chance I'm not. And as I said, they have very rounded wings, and their longest primary is P6, which is this one. I will put a picture. And while we're on the subject of feathers, just generally, primaries are the outer wing feathers that provide propulsion for a bird. I don't know why I wrote that. That was a terrible thing to say. Primaries are the long outer wing feathers that provide propulsion for a bird, and their secondaries are the feathers that are closer into the body that provide lift. The actual positioning and the structure of these different feathers make a difference to how a given bird will fly. It matters. You can't just slap some feathers on them. It needs to have a setup. Their primaries are attached to their hand bone and extend past their wingtips, and their secondaries are attached to their forearm bone. As hatchlings, they are covered in a white down, which is adorable. And as juveniles, once they fledged, they have brown upper parts and streaky buff underparts with pale yellow eyes. Their eyes start to change. And yeah, they have a couple of other plumages that they molt through, but they get to be adults, okay? That's what happens. They get to adult plumage in the fall. And their molt strategy is a modified basic strategy. These guys were previously considered to be under the genus Accipiter, but it was somewhat recently shown that this was actually a polyphyletic group and not a true evolutionary lineage. And a polyphyletic group is a group that's grouped together usually because of some similarity in trait, but that does not actually include their last common ancestor. So, so it would be like putting bats in with birds and calling that a family in there somehow, even though the most common ancestor of those guys is much further up the evolutionary lineage. Did that make sense? I hope it did. And so now Cooper's hawks and their relatives have been moved to the genus Aster. And now they're with things that they're actually closely genetically related to, which is what taxonomy is all about. Not just whatever we want. It's kind of the goal. Why Pluto's not a planet anymore. Because taxonomy. It's what definitions are. And though these guys have somewhat different sizes, variable based on location, they don't actually have any subspecies. They're all considered the same. It's called monotypic, if you want the big word for it. While we're on the subject of taxonomy, I keep calling these guys raptors, which they are. All hawks are considered raptors, which is a word derived from the Latin word rapio, which means to seize or take by force. However, this is not a taxa. Raptors are birds of prey. They're the birds that attack stuff and eat it. To be slightly more specific, they typically eat more than 70% meat, which is what puts them in the category of raptors. This includes hawks and buzzards and falcons and osprey, eagles, and several more birds. Birds that feel dangerous to us, even though they're still birds. Don't go and attack a falcon just because I said it's a bird, you could probably beat it. It will still hurt you, but it's still a bird. It's not gonna win. Oh. Don't bet on it though. I'd bet on the falcon. I'd take it all back. They've got a pretty big range in general, with their breeding and non-breeding ranges overlapping a fair amount. Although northern birds do migrate south for the winter, as most creatures do that have any sense at all. But still, most winter in the continental US or Mexico. As I said, they are found in forests, deciduous, mixed, and coniferous forests. They like big trees. They don't care what kind of trees. But as I said, we've also seen them adapting to more suburban and urban environments, so it's not actually out of the question to see one in the middle of the city somewhere. They don't have any particularly interesting things about their migration. They sort of migrate through forests, the same place that they stay when they're not migrating, although juveniles are more likely to migrate through open areas, so you're more likely to see them when they're migrating. And migration is typically solitary, although sometimes you'll find a couple of them together, but they don't do big flocks. And they do not typically migrate over water. They don't like big water crossings. Not a water bird. Look at those feet. Not getting anywhere in the water. And as for dispersal of birds in general, you have a nest, they grow up, they gotta leave at some point. Females typically disperse farther than males, which actually helps with inbreeding, with males typically migrating about 7 kilometers and females typically migrating about 28 kilometers. So a somewhat significant difference. As I said, they eat meat. That is their thing. And so a lot of their prey is smaller songbirds, plus small mammals and reptiles, and occasionally fish or insects. Their prey size is typically about 30 to 130 grams, and females typically take down larger prey than males. I know, circle of life and everything. I learned about that a long time ago. I like the evolution of birds. Kinda had to learn about that. I, in fact, am so uncomfortable about this kind of thing that I once got a pretty good picture of a red-tailed hawk eating a chipmunk, and I deleted a couple of those pictures. Fully deleted them, so I wouldn't have to stare at the half-eaten chipmunk. Wasn't worth it. When foraging, they prefer forests and the edge of their habitats as opposed to open fields. They don't like open hunting. Although you can see them in parks and golf courses sometimes for urban populations. And typically females are more adventuresome than males and will take more risks to get food, particularly when there's scarcity. And they sort of pursue their prey where they go for at least a little bit, including through open doors into buildings, if that's where their prey happens to run. I did, however, write this down as they can hunt indoors. Don't really think so. Don't think that captures it. And they are a stealthy ambush predator. They perch quietly and they fly low and fast to get their prey, and will use cover and surprise their prey if possible. They typically capture their prey with both of their feet and will kill them by grasping or drowning them. They also do have a typical order in which they eat their prey, which is this. And they will sometimes cache uneaten prey on branches during the breeding season. And incubating females are usually fed 3 times a day by their male partner. As a human, I approve. It's the only thing I approve of these birds as a human. They occasionally will also hunt nestlings and fledglings of other species, such as the willow flycatcher, which can affect their populations, obviously. And it seems that the Cooper's hawk population may increase due to rodent abundance, which is dependent on acorn abundance. And that is certainly the food chain. And sounds. Of course, they make sounds. As juveniles, the large thing that they do is they've got some cheeps and some begging calls. That's what they want. They want food. They want it always. And at about 3 weeks old, they might start to mimic adults' calls. These guys are pretty stereotypical when it comes to sounds for a bird. Their vocalizations are most common during the breeding season, at dawn, near their nest, and are primarily used for mate communication, alarm signaling, and territorial defense. These guys don't really have a song, not a songbird, distinctly a bird of prey. And females seem to have a larger call repertoire than males. And vocal communication is pretty important in dense woodlands where they live, where visibility is low. Their mating system is primarily socially monogamous, but with a high rate of extra pair paternity, with some females being noted to leave their territories to mate with other males, and some males being noted to have multiple female partners. I can't even begin to think about bird psychology. I don't think that even exists, but socially monogamous? They're socially monogamous? If we can figure this out, why can't they figure this out? That there's high extra pair paternity. I mean, I know why. They're birds. And within a mating pair, males typically stay pretty close to the female and bring them food several times a day. And these guys have an estimated 372 copulations per clutch, which is among the highest recorded for birds. And despite all the complications within their sexual behavior, outside of the breeding season, they're basically solitary birds. Their response to humans is variable, although typically it is non-aggressive and inconspicuous. They don't care about us too much. Sometimes they will leave stealthily if they see a human coming, but if they get disturbed a lot by humans, that can increase the chances for aggression, although attacks on humans are rare. Notice how I said rare, though, and not zero. Don't go tee off a Cooper's hawk because I said so. Nest building usually takes about 2 weeks and is typically done mostly by the male in a pair. They typically lay their first eggs in April or May, and if a first clutch is lost, they often will have a second one. Although not a second brood, only a second clutch if the first one is lost. And their clutch size is usually 3 or 4 eggs, although it can actually range from 1 to 8. With eggs laid typically every 2 days, although sometimes 3, every 3 days. Their hatching is asynchronous, with the first 3 eggs typically hatching on the same day, and then later eggs hatching 1 to 3 days afterwards, which results in a pretty big size difference among the hatchlings, which are altricial with that white down I was talking about earlier, blue-gray eyes, and are only about 28 grams. They have pretty quick growth until about day 23 to 28, which is around when they get to fledging. And in growth, males and females start to diverge in size at about day 7. And by day 10, they can stand and flap their wings. By day 24, they can defend food and interact aggressively with their siblings, and they start climbing and flapping to branches near fledging. And post-fledging, fledglings usually stay pretty near the nest to still be taken care of by their parents a bit. And juveniles often establish home territories that overlap with their parents once they disperse. Their first year mortality is pretty high, in the mid 70%, but then after their first year, it stabilizes to about the mid 30s. And these guys typically don't breed until they reach 2 years of age. And the maximum recorded ages for these guys are 20 years for males and 12 years for females, which is a pretty large difference. As is often the case, the most common cause of mortality for these guys is nest predation. It's why first-year survival rates are pretty bad compared to later survival rates. Their breeding territories around the nests are pretty small, but their hunting territories are usually much bigger, with just a little bit being that nesting territory, with nesting spaces usually being under 1 kilometer, but home ranges varying wildly from 13 to 1,800 hectares. That's too much space. too much. So I feel like I keep saying this over and over, but I was not looking for this bird. I was looking for something completely different. I don't remember what, I think I say. So I've kind of got no hope of finding a lark, but gonna go sit by a meadow, see what happens. I was at Owl Woods up in Braddock Bay. I go there again and again. I always will. I think it was a meadowlark. It was a meadowlark I was looking for, which is why I went to sit in this meadow that's in Braddock Bay's Owl Woods. I brought a chair, think I even brought a coffee, and immediately got distracted by something way off in the distance, which is why I have a full 6 minutes of footage of just this chair with the reeds blowing in the breeze because I was off looking at what I'm pretty sure was a winter wren. I think I got a couple of nice pictures of them. Eventually I did come back and sit and try to read my book.
Sorry I abandoned you. Except not really.
I've mentioned that this works very rarely for me. I got distracted by some golden-crowned kinglets, which is fine. Got one of the best pictures I've ever had of a golden-crowned kinglet. No meadowlark, though. Didn't think I was gonna find a meadowlark. I think I even said that. You just gotta try and try and try. It's what birding is. So I decided to keep walking because I was sick of sitting and not reading my book because I never read my book. And I ended up walking to this other little part of the woods, which was woods, not a meadow any longer. And there was something making a noise in here. I still don't know what. You can't see me that well, but I promise I'm right there. You see me? And so I was standing there looking for something completely else when something started screeching at me. And you can in fact hear it. Which so very often you don't get to hear what I hear because I'm not usually filming because I took a picture first. And so being chased by something that I'm pretty sure was a jay, a hawk-shaped thing flew under the canopy but above me to another tree about 100 feet away from me. I immediately, of course, ran away from where I was towards where it had landed. I say ran, but I only ran about halfway and then very quietly snuck up on where I thought it was. I still managed to get only one blurry picture of it while it was still perched before it took flight again. But I did get one pretty good picture of it actually in flight, so I was pretty pleased with that. But after taking just my quick few pictures, it flew away from me to where I couldn't follow it if I wanted to stay on the path and like a normal person. So that's a Cooper's hawk. Finally, did a bird of prey. I did it. You're welcome. I'm gonna go back to the insectivores and the frugivores now. My comfort zone. And ducks. They don't have teeth. Well, neither do these birds, but they got the sharp bill. That's, you know what I mean. Don't forget, I'm not an ornithologist. I know very little about raptors at all, know much more about ducks. So don't take my word for any of this. I just love it. I love the things that I see whenever I see them, even when they're raptors. I promise. There's still affection in my heart, even though they're not ducks.